Hello guys, this is Oroth and a warm welcome back to my channel. I'm currently working on my free-to-play series. I already released part 1, which was about the damage formula, and in the next episode we're gonna take a look at legendary gems. But before releasing that video, I wanted to give the monk class some love, because the monk class has been under a lot of scrutiny for a long time. It has been considered one of the weakest classes, both in PvE and in PvP. But I have to say that there are many interesting and very efficient builds for PvE content. And that's what we're going to take a look at today. So first I'm going to showcase the top DPS version. And then we're going to look at alterations. So a build for open world farming and Abyssal Verge. And we're also going to take a look at two different dungeon builds. One that revolves around summons and one that revolves around primary attacks. So let's begin by looking at the top DPS build. And the skills I'm using is in the primary slot I use Fists of Thunder. In the first skill slot I use Seven-Sided Strike. In the second skill slot I use Flying Dragon. In the third skill slot I use Imprisoned Fist. And in the fourth and final skill slot I use Inner Sanctuary. Let's move on and look at the essences one by one, and you will see that this build revolves around primary attacks. So let's begin by looking at the helmet slot, where I use Humbled Horizon, and what it says is that Inner Sanctuary follows you, increasing the primary attack speed of nearby allies. So now if I use Inner Sanctuary, you can see that I have this white circle around me, and myself and any ally, including summons within this circle, will get its primary attack speed buffed by 50%. So it's a huge primary attack speed buff. So you can see now when I'm attacking the target, I have a very high attack speed thanks to this essence. In the chest slot, I use Nest of Vipers, and what it says is that Flying Dragon now grants you Dragon Strike, causing each primary attack to release a damaging wave of energy. So whenever I use Flying Dragon, you can see now that I have a duration bar next to the skill. This indicates that this works as a buff, so it can be prolonged by beneficial effect duration. And whenever I attack the target, I will also deal damage with Flying Dragon. So it's linked to my primary attack. In the next skill slot, I'm using Rip Current Shells, in the shoulder slot that is. And what it says is that Imprisoned Fist now grants you Waning Flare, causing each primary attack to release a wave of energy that slows enemies. So now, if I use Imprisoned Fist, you can see that whenever I use the primary attack, there is this blue energy wave coming from my character. And this will hurt and deal damage to any enemy in its path. So it's also a type of AoE damage. In the pants slot, I use Empty Cups, and what it says is that Flying Dragon also conjures a tornado for 1.5 seconds after striking the same enemy multiple times in quick succession. So now if I use Flying Dragon again, you can see that I will start spawning these tornadoes, and they will continually deal damage to the targets they hit. In the first mainland slot, I use Order Without Sin, and what it says is that the final strike of Fists of Thunder full combo now generates a ball of lightning that deals damage continually. So now if I attack the target here, you can see that I spawn this orb of lightning that will continually deal damage to the target. And if I keep attacking it, it will be spawned all the time. So yeah, a great extra buff to the primary attack damage. In the first offhand slot, I use 1000th Cut. And what it says is that Fist of Thunder damage is increased by 15.2% for each abnormal status on the enemy, up to a maximum of 60.8%. And this means that for each harmful effect that I inflict on the target, the more damage I will deal with the primary attack here. In the second main hand slot, I use Tenebrous Grasp, and what it says is that Seven-Sided Strike now causes your primary attacks to conjure a spirit ally to unleash a powerful strike on your target, damaging any enemies within its path. So now if I use Seven-Sided Strike, you can see that I also attack the target whenever I use the primary attack. In the second offhand slot, I use Vanadin Sting, and what it says is that Flying Dragon now also shatters enemy armor, increasing damage taken by 11.4% for 3 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. So now if I attack the target, you can see that I will apply an armor break. And I also have armor break on my familiar. They will not stack. So this is to ensure that the armor break is constantly applied to the target. You can see that the symbol above it remains there as long as I use Flying Dragon. I've been trying out all different essence combinations, and this is the one that performs best. And I can see that a lot of people, they are not using 1000 Cut. Instead, they're using Thrumming Ferocity. So let us take a look at it. Thrumming Ferocity is an inner sanctuary essence that increases the damage done by you and your allies by 15.2% whenever they are within this inner sanctuary area. And yeah, this is also good essence, of course, if you are in a party, because you will also buff the rest of your team. But now when we are doing solo DPS, this will not outperform the 1000 Cut essence. Because the main source of damage, if we will look at our breakdown later, is the primary attack. So it will have a greater effect to use 1000 Cut in comparison to Thrumming Ferocity. Let us next take a look at the set pieces I'm using. And I'm using 4 pieces of Grace, because it will have this effect that when I deal damage 5 times, I will deal an additional burst of damage. So very strong with this type of build, because we will dish out a lot of quick attacks in succession. And on top of that, I also use 4 pieces of Vitus Urge for 2 reasons. The first one is that I want to prolong the beneficial effect durations. And if you see here, all of these skills here are counted as buffs. So without 2 pieces of Vitus Urge, I will not have 100% uptime on these. I can of course also prolong this by having beneficial effect duration on my runes, or on my Reforges, or on my magical attributes. On top of that, it's also very important to have 4 pieces of Vitus Urge, because this gives me 30% extra attack speed whenever I use a buff. So you can see now up here in the left corner that whenever I use a buff, it will increase the attack speed by 30%. So if we combine the primary attack speed from the inner sanctuary, the Vitus Urge from 4 pieces of Vitus Urge, and also some attack speed from my magical attributes and from my Reforges, I will be able to reach the attack speed cap of 100%. And this is very important in order to make as much damage as possible with this build. Let's also continue and take a look at the legendary gems. So I use Royal Consequence because it gives me critical hit chance, which is the most important things in terms of DPS output. For the same reason, I use Mother's Lament. I use Blood-Soaked Jade because it gives me a plain damage buff. And of course, I have it at rank 10. You don't need to have it at rank 10. If you would have it at rank 4, it would almost have the same effect. So the resonance is not important. So you don't have to be stressed that you have to get your gems to higher ranks. This build will work fine anyways. I also use Fervent Fang. I use Berserker's Eye. And I use Pain Clasp. And all of these 3 gems are also because they give a plain damage buff. And that's also why I'm using Bottled Hope. And finally, I use Gloom Cask, which works very good with any type of primary attack build. It also places a debuff on the target so that they will take some extra primary attack damage, which of course is great for this type of build. So let us take a quick look at my Reforges as well. I use, first of all, damage to enemies suffering loss of control increased by 4%. And what's good about this is that if you go here and look on the runes here in my main hands, they have this effect that says that your primary attacks have a 6% chance to reduce enemy attack and movement speed by 20% for 3 seconds. So now if you look below the health bar of the training dummy, you can see that I apply a debuff called Chilled. And this actually works as, or this actually counts as loss of control. So this will trigger this Reforge. In the second slot, I have damage to demons increased by X%. And of course, this is not useful at the dummy because the dummy is not a demon. But if I'm doing Gauntlet, this will help me to increase the damage even further. And in the third slot, I have attack speed. Because as I just explained, thanks to the Inner Sanctuary essence, in the helmet slot, the 4-piece of Vitus Urge, and my Reforgers, I am able to reach the cap of 100% on my primary attack speed. In the next slot I use Duration of Beneficial Effects, and this is because, yeah, most of the skills here, they are counted as buffs, and I want 100% uptime, so I use 2 pieces of Vitu, and I also use this Reforge, and I usually have this Reforge active on all of my builds, because it's very, very important. It also prolongs the duration of some gem effects like Roiling Consequence, for example, or Gloom Cask. So yeah, also a top solid choice. And in the final slot I use critical hit damage, because I will have a lot of critical hit chance, and if I have a lot of critical hit chance, it will also make critical hit damage even more impactful. And you can see here that since I have 3 of the same family here in the Vengeance family, I also have a chance to increase all damage I deal by 100% for 1 second. And this is also prolonged by beneficial effect duration. So if you look now on my buffs, if I start attacking a target, you will see that I have this, there you see it. It's like a short duration, and it has a 10-second or a 9-second cooldown before it can trigger again. Let's also go and have a look at my Paragon setting. So I use 5 different effects from the Slinger category. I use Unseen Dynamism, I use Gifted, I use Uncanny, I use Bloodthirst, and I also use Deadly Intent. I've been playing around a lot with these combinations, and this is the one that performs the best with this build. Let us also take a look at the Warband settings. I'm using the Attacker Room, which gives me damage done increase by 3.5%. And we can also look at the Remnants that I'm using Typhorus, that increases my damage by 6%. I use Color Brutus, that will increase my damage by 10%. I have Coward's Rage. This will have no effect because I will actually always be close to the enemies when I'm attacking them with this build. I have War Vase, which increases my critical hit chance a little bit. And finally, I also have Liar's Pact, which increases my critical hit chance while attacking from behind. And yes, I also have Arrowhead of Precision here, which gives me an extra % in critical hit chance. And this is the reason why I'm always standing behind the dummy when I'm attacking it, because I want this extra little critical hit chance buff from Liar's Pact. Finally, let us also take a look at my familiars. You can see here that I have maxed the Maim trait, which gives me extra critical hit chance. And if we look here on my companion, I use the Brood Talon. And the reason for this is because it has a skill called Lingering Wounds. And I've been able to get Insight maxed on this familiar, so I will get the maximum effect. That applies an armor break of 36.5% for 3 seconds. And this 3 seconds can of course be prolonged if you have extra potency as well. And with this particular build, it's not super important since we are using Venedin's Sting, because Venedin's Sting will also apply an almost equally strong debuff on the target. But for most top DPS builds, it's very important that you can put in a strong armor break, and many classes, they don't have the optimal essences for it, and that's why Lingering Wounds are so strong, because there are not many armor breaks effects that can give more than 30% armor break on the target. Here we are at the training dummy, and let's see what output we now can get with this build. So what I always do first is that I activate Inner Sanctuary before using the other 3 buffs, and after that I just keep on hammering the dummy. And it's such a simple build to use, because all I need to do is to keep attacking with the primary attack and use the skills whenever the cooldown is ready. And I always try to use Imprisoned Fist before using 7-sided strike, because the duration of Imprisoned Fist is a little bit shorter. So to ensure that I have 100% uptime, I want to use that skill before 7-sided strike. What's also important to mention here is that you can see I have 3 bystanders. They are in my party, but they are not doing anything. They're just here because I have some attributes that increases my damage for each party member. So I think that this still counts as solo damage, since I'm the only one attacking. But I would deal just a little bit less if I were not in a party. And we can conclude after seeing this that the monk can deal a lot of damage. maybe it's not the top DPS dealer. I've been able to perform better with the Crusader, for example. But we also have to remember here that I am using a Inner Sanctuary buff that will buff all of my teammates with a lot of primary attack speed. So it's not only that I can deal a lot of damage output, I will also increase the damage output of all of my party members that are within the Inner Sanctuary. So I would have to say that the Monk is at a pretty good place right now in PvE. And we will also see now when we look at the other builds for open world farming, Abyssal Verge and dungeons, that there are many different options that we can utilize as of now. So I hope that you enjoyed this top DPS version. It's very feasible to use it if you have played other primary attack builds, because then you probably already have the correct gems and the correct reforges. But you have to remember that I'm not optimized here, I would say, because there are some things I could change. I don't have beneficial effect duration on my chest, for example, and there are some upgrades that can be done to my reforges. They are not maxed. But of course, I realize that a lot of people, they maybe don't have all of the legendary gems I've been showing here. Maybe they have a different setup. And of course, for each detail that you change, your output will go down. But even if you can just live up to 66% of the setup I am using, you will still be able to deal a lot of damage. And also remember that the buff that you give from the Inner Sanctuary, that one is always at full value, no matter your resonance or your setup. So that's a very good thing. And yeah, what I can say before we move on is that I can use this particular setup if I go into Gauntlet. I would not use it in raids personally, because in raids with my warband we kill it so fast, so I have to get to the boss as fast as possible. But for most people, I think that this can be a very viable option in raids, Gauntlet, and in Vanguard as well. So I hope that you like this one, and let's move on to the open world and Abyssal Verge version. So now I have equipped my open world farming build, and let's take a look at the skills. We can see that I'm still using the Fist of Thunder primary attack, but I will almost never use it. It's only if I have to kill a boss sometimes. But if we look at the skills, I keep Inner Sanctuary and Seven-Sided Strike, but I instead use also Cyclone Strike and Exploding Palm. And if we look on the essences, we can see that I have changed my Inner Sanctuary, so I now use Inner Flame, and what it says is that Inner Sanctuary now conjures a runic circle of flame that follows you, burning nearby enemies. So instead of this primary attack speed buff, I will get this flame circle, and whenever I get close to an enemy, it will start dealing damage to it. So this is of course helpful in open world farming, because I just want to move around without using primary attacks and without slowing down, and I want a big area of effects that kills off enemies. If we look in the chest piece, I use Driven Thunder, and what it says is that Cyclone Strike is now channeled, causing you to run forward, spinning a Staff of Storms to damage enemies. While channeling, you're immune to knockback effects. So it looks like this, it's like a helicopter almost. And what's very good about this as well is that it will increase your movement speed. So even if you're managing to cap your movement speed at 70%, whenever you use this skill, you will move faster. So let's try now. If I increase my speed from the Bottled Hope a little bit, you can see my speed now. And as soon as I start using the helicopter, I run even faster. So this is one of very few ways to move even faster than your movement speed cap. And I'm going to show you the build in open world farming in just a little bit. So you will see it in action. If we look in the shoulder slot, I use Windchild, and what it says is that Seven-Sided Strike increases your movement speed by 10% for 3.2 seconds after hitting an enemy, up to a maximum of 40%. So this is a good tool to make sure that I can reach the movement speed cap, and I'm going to explain to you very soon how you will do it. So if I use Seven-Sided Strike, you can see now that I get this buff that increases my movement speed whenever it hits an enemy. And you can also see that the effect is prolonged thanks to beneficial effect duration, so it's around 5 seconds for this buff. So yeah, this is a way to let me move even faster in open world farming. And now you can see with the Cyclone Strike I can start moving very fast. But I will actually be able to move even faster than this, and I'm going to show you in just a little bit how to do so. In the pants slot, I'm currently using Path of the Storm. This is not the one you should use because this works with Cyclone Strike and it decreases the damage you take. I use this now because it reduces the cooldown of the Cyclone Strike a little bit. But there is another essence that you should use. I have not been able to find it yet, but it's called Terminal Pace. And what it says is that Cyclone Strike's damage is increased by 1.9% up to a maximum of 57% for every 1% increase in movement speed. And thanks to the shoulder and some other factors, this will be at the maximum value all the time. If we look in the first main hand slot, I'm using Leaping Shadow. And what it says is that 7-sided strike now empowers you for several seconds, during which you continually launch attacks at random nearby enemies. And this is what I just showed you. Like whenever I use 7-sided strike, I will have this buff that will continually deal damage to nearby enemies. So this works very well with the shoulder that increases the movement speed. Let's take a look at the first offense slot. Here I use Obstruction of Omniscience. And what it says is that Exploding Palm now dashes forward, burning enemies. So I use this because I really like this Exploding Palm dash. And what's also good about this dash is that the cooldown will be reduced the more enemies you hit. So we can see here that Exploding Palm's cooldown is also reduced by 0.5 seconds for each enemy hit, up to 2 seconds. So if I hit 10 enemies, I will reduce the cooldown by 2 seconds. And this is just an extra tool to get from pack to pack a lot faster in open world farming. And we will see it soon in action. In the second main hand slot, I use Order Without Sin. And what it says is that the final strike of Fits of Thunder's full combo now generates a ball of lightning. We've already seen this. And yeah, this will not really matter that much since I'm not going to use the primary attack. But in some situations where you have this event boss, or if you find a red elite monster, then it might be useful if you need to deal a little bit of extra damage to kill it. Finally, in the second offense slot, I use Boundless Breath. And what it says is that Cyclone Strike's cooldown is reduced by 0.07 seconds, or 1.6 energy is recovered for every yard moved. So this is very good because now if I have a lot of movement speed, I will move a lot faster. And now you can see that I have very, very long duration on this skill thanks to my movement speed. So I can almost use it indefinitely. Now let us take a look at how we can cap our movement speed at 70% as a monk. So movement speed is divided into 3 different categories. And for a long time there has only been 2 categories, and it has not been possible for some classes to maximize their movement speed on their own. But now there is a way to do this for everyone, and let us look at how to do it. So first of all, in the first category, we have legendary gems and magical attributes. So for example, we can see here that I have a Blood-Soaked Jade, which will increase my movement speed by 10%. And I also can have magical attributes on my set items, for example, that also increases my movement speed. There are also some runes that will increase your movement speed. And in this category, you can get a maximum of 20% extra movement speed. So let's say that I have the Blood-Soaked Jade at 10%, and then I add 20% movement speed from magical attributes. If there wasn't a cap on this category, I would receive 30% movement speed, but the cap is 20%. So as long as you reach that cap, you don't have to look for more movement speed in that category. The second category is the strongest movement speed buff you receive. So for example, in this case, we're using the Windchild shoulder, and it will add 40% movement speed when it's at maximum value. So if we take 20% plus 40%, then we are at 60%. And these are the only 2 categories that existed for a long time. And if that would still be the case, we would not be at the 70% movement speed cap. Luckily for us, there are now new ways to improve your movement speed through a third category. And this category is clandestine effects. So if we look here on my chest piece, I have something that says movement speed increased by 0.3% for 5 seconds after killing a monster, up to a maximum of 9%. And this can stack up to 4 times. So you can get 36% extra movement speed also from this clandestine effects. Since we already have 60% movement speed from the first 2 categories, I would only need to find 2 pieces with this affix to cap my movement speed at 70%. And on top of that, we can also increase our movement speed by increasing our size. And here we have 2 tools that we can use. So one change that we do in open world farming is that we're also changing our Paragon. And the main reason for this is because we want this rugged effect and we want this combat expertise effect. And this is in the brawler category because this will add 8% increased size. And size will in turn increase our movement speed. We can also look at another way to increase our size. So let's go here to room management in our warband. And instead of using the damage room, I'm going to switch. So I'm using the protector room instead. And the reason for this is because if we go here to remnants and have a look, we can see that I have shepherd's burden in the protector category. And it will increase my size by 15%. So if we combine the Paragon with the warband size, we gain 23% extra size. And it works like this. If you are at normal size, your base speed is 1. But if you are at bigger size, in this case 23% bigger, our base speed will increase by 23%. So our new base speed will be 1.23 instead. And what we can also see when we do this is that the efficiency of these 69% that I have right now from the 3 movement speed categories will be a lot higher. So at normal size, I would gain 0.69 extra speed from these movement speed buffs. But if I'm bigger, I will gain 0.85 extra speed. So size does not only increase your base speed, it also increases your actual speed when you receive buffs. So very important for most type of content since mobility is vital. Let us also take a look at the gems I'm using for this setup. And here we are trying to focus a lot more on dot effects and explosions and dot enablers, which means effects that will help me to spread the dots around in a bigger area. So I use Roiling Consequence still because this also adds a dot effect to the targets. I use Volatility Shard because it's an explosion. I keep Blood-Soaked Jade for the movement speed. I have Viper's Bite for a dot effect. I have Void Spark to help me spread the dots. I have Igneous Scorn to add another explosion that will kill off packs. I use Bottle Hope just for some extra damage. I could switch it out. And I also use Seeping Bile as a dot effect. You don't need to use all of these gems. There are many combinations that will work fine. But especially if you're lower resonance, I recommend you to get these gems at low ranks because it will work wonders when you are farming. And you will see soon in the open world exactly what I mean about that. So these are the changes for the open world farming build, and let us now dive straight into open world to see it in action. So here we are in Mount Savan, and now I want you to pay very close attention. So we have already increased our movement speed to the cap, and we have also increased our size. But still, when we use Cyclone Strike, we're able to move even faster. So it's crazy speed with this build. We're also using the Exploding Palm Dash because it triggers this Gloom Skies price buff that gives us both extra damage and some critical hit chance. And finally, I want you to pay close attention on how my legendary gems are working. You will soon see how my Void Spark is spreading dots all across the screen, and it will help me to kill off all the mobs in a huge area. So all in all, this is a very efficient open world farming build, as you can see here, and I hope that you enjoy it when you try it out. Now let's move on to dungeons, and we're gonna start by looking at a primary attack version. I have now switched to my primary attack dungeon build, and you will see that it's like a hybrid between the top DPS build and the farming build that we just looked at. And the key here is that I want to keep some DPS elements to deal enough damage to bosses, but I also want to add some extra mobility. So what changes have I made? First of all, we have still the Fists of Thunder primary attack, and in the first skill slot I use Exploding Palm, and you can see here that I use Seven-Sided Strike, Flying Dragon and Inner Sanctuary, just like in the top DPS build. In this version I'm switching back to the Humbled Horizon helmet that gives us the primary attack speed from the Inner Sanctuary. I will keep the Nest of Vipers from the top DPS build, and I will keep the Windchild from the farming build to give me some extra speed. I also keep the Empty Cups pants from the top DPS build, and I use Order Without Sin. I use Obstruction of Omniscience for the dash from Exploding Palm. I use Sleeping Shadow for the passive effect of the Seven-Sided Strike to help me gain movement speed when I'm running through the dungeons without having to attack anything. And finally, I also switch in Venedin's Sting again, because this will apply this armor break whenever I use Flying Dragon on the target, as I showed in the beginning of this video when we looked in the top DPS build. So, like I said, it's like a hybrid between the top DPS version and the farming version. What's also important to mention is that I keep the same Paragon here as for the farming, because just as in the farming version I want to have as high speed as possible. We've already talked about it. And we can also mention here that I switched back to the original gem composition, the same that I used for the top DPS version, and the same goes for the set pieces here. I use 4 pieces of Grace and I use 4 pieces of Vitus Urge. So let us see how this performs in a dungeon. Here we are in Cavern of Echoes, and the first thing I do whenever I enter a dungeon is to activate the Seven-Sided Strike skill, because this will also trigger Bottled Hope, which will give me extra movement speed from the get-go. And you can see that I was able to move very fast. I also have the dashes, so I can dash from point A to point B very fast. And the key with this build is to have the right amount of mobility and the right amount of damage output. So I've tried to find a nice balance. And we can see here that I have great damage output. Of course, I'm very well spec'd as well, but if you try this build, it will be perfect. Also, this Inner Sanctuary, as I said, will help to buff all of your teammates. So it's especially bonkers if you're playing together with a summon demon hunter or a necromancer, because it will also buff their summons within the Inner Sanctuary area. I will say that the small downside of the primary attack version is maybe that it's a little bit slow to kill off the adds. If there's a big room, for example, it's still decent, I think. And in most cases we can just skip the adds and run for the bosses, and it has quite high single target DPS. So it's a very versatile and all-round dungeon build for any monk player. And now we're gonna move on and take a look at the summon archetype, which is also great to use in dungeons. So now I have switched to my summon version of the dungeon build, and we're gonna take a look at some of the changes we've made. First of all, we are still using Seven-Sided Strike and Inner Sanctuary, but we are now also using Mystic Allies and Mystic Strike. And we still use Fists of Thunder primary attack. And if we go in here, we can see that instead of 4 pieces of Grace, I am using 4 pieces of Shepherd, because now we have summons, and this will increase the damage done by all of my summons, and it will also give me some extra critical hit chance, which is always good to increase our DPS. If we look at the essences, we can see that I keep the helmet Humbled Horizon, but now I use the Falcon's Dive chest instead. This makes the area of effect a lot bigger for the Inner Sanctuary, and this is quite good when we're using summons, because they will maybe move around in a little bit of a bigger area. and this will of course also increase the attack speed of party members further away. So we are losing a little bit of mobility because we're no longer using the exploding palm dash, but we are gaining a little bit of extra inner sanctuary efficiency. We can also see that we're still using the Windchild shoulder, and now we have switched out the pants for lingering incense, which let us use Mystic Strike to summon some extra summons. And this is good if we are in a bigger room. We can spread these summons out and they will start attacking all across the room. And then it's also good that we have this extra size on the inner sanctuary so that it will reach all of the summons, or most of them at least. If we look here in the first main hand slot, I use Wind Reaver's Wing, and what it says is that Mystic Allies now summons 2 Spirit Allies of Wind that fire piercing air blades at enemies. And the main reason for why I'm using this version of Mystic Allies is that the attack is ranged. So you can see now it's ranged attacks, and you can see the attacks a lot faster as well when I use the Inner Sanctuary. So the issue with the primary attack version could sometimes be in some dungeons, like Forgotten Tower for example, where you have to kill off a lot of adds in a huge area. It took a little bit longer with the primary attack version. And now with the ranged summons and also the possibilities we have to send out these extra summons from Mystic Strike, it will help us to clear off big rooms of adds a little bit faster. We can also take a look here in the first offhand slot. I now use this Thrumming Ferocity essence because it will increase the damage to any allies within this inner sanctuary area, and now the area is also bigger, and this will help me to buff the damage of the summons, because if you remember, our primary damage source with the previous builds, the top DPS one and the primary attack dungeon version, was the primary attack, but this will not be the case anymore, so that's why we can switch in Thrumming Ferocity. If we look in the first main hand slot, I'm still using Leaping Shadow just to get this extra movement speed buff from 7-sided strike. And finally, I use Harsh Truth in the second offhand. And what it does is that it gives us 1 extra charge of Mystic Strike. So in many dungeons, we are able to run straight to a boss, and then we will have a lot of burst damage with these extra summons that are spawning. So yeah, that's why I used this setup. We can also take a look at the legendary gems. I am using Roiling Consequence still, Mother's Lament still, Blood-Soaked Jade still, but now I use Echoing Shade as well, because this will give me some extra clones, and they will also be buffed by the Shepherd set. They will be buffed by the Inner Sanctuary, and yeah, it's just a very strong gem for summoners. And I still use Berserker's Eye, Pain Clasp and Bottled Hope. One alteration more I've done is that I also use Freedom and Devotion, because we want to have as long duration on the summons as possible. In terms of Paragon and Warband, we are still aiming to increase our size as much as possible, because in dungeons we are not looking for top DPS, we are looking for a lot of mobility. So we have to find the balance between DPS output and mobility. And this is a great way to do so. I would say that this build is maybe performing a little bit worse than the primary attack version in single target damage, but it makes up for it in the AoE effects of the summons spread out in big rooms killing adds. So this is the summon version, and let us now take a look at a dungeon run. Here we are in Forgotten Tower, and once again I use 7-sided strike immediately because it will trigger the Bottled Hope movement speed buff. And I chose this dungeon because I think it illustrates quite well how good this build is at clearing adds in big rooms, and that's an important thing in this dungeon. I always try to learn how to conserve my skills properly, because I always want Mystic Allies ready when there's a boss fight. And I also don't have to use all of my Mystic Strike summons whenever they are ready. I can conserve them for when the burst is needed. And now you can see how I just placed down 1 Mystic Strike summon in every corner of each room, and then they will help me to kill off everything. And then I can just keep on running to the next point I need to reach as fast as possible. With the primary attack version, I would have a little bit more trouble here to clear all of these ads. It will take a little bit longer. So yeah, I really like this summon version. But you know, I'm also a summon junkie, so hopefully I managed to clear enough ads to trigger the next room. It looks like not. I need 3 more, so let's go back. But thanks to my high movement speed, that won't be a huge issue. And now we can also see the solo target DPS here on this boss. And I will have to say, I mentioned earlier that the primary attack version is maybe a little bit stronger in this regard, but that's only because it's easier to focus exactly which target to attack. On this boss, for example, all of my summons will attack the boss, and then the solo target DPS will be very high as well. So all in all, we can say that this build also performs very well in dungeons. And as a verdict now and a summary on this whole video, I have to say that the monk class is actually quite strong right now in PvE content. We are able to deal a lot of DPS, we are able to have very high mobility, and we're also able to buff our teammates. So I'm quite satisfied with the current state of the monk. It needs a little bit of improvement in PvP, and there are of course some aspects where maybe the monk is not shining the most, but it's not as bad as people give it credit for. So with that being said, I would like to wish you a very nice day or a very nice evening wherever you are. And to all of my clan members in Nyx, I would also like to say Voruk Nyx, Sholak Sul. So bye bye!
Guess who's back with some brand new content? Hit the bell button, maybe leave a comment. Oroth with the swagger, wanna see his game. Teach you all the secrets, it will be insane. Guess who's back with a brand new lesson? He will have the answer if you have a question. Oroth invites you to his awesome tribe. No more time to waste, it's time to hit subscribe. 1, 2, 3 is the man of our affection. 4, 5, 6 only aiming for perfection. 7, 8, 9 he is 10 out of 10. Subscribe and you will never miss a video again.